Hello, everyone. Hello, YouTube and Zoom. It is time for another afternoon at the museum show. I'm Janine Stanley, and I am the Customer Communications Director here at Aira, and I got my title totally backward, but that's okay because it's Friday. And today we have special guest. We have a fun destination with some really interesting history. Now, February is Black History Month here in the United States, and when you think about, excuse me, when you think about Black history, you think civil rights movement, all those things, and you think about the U.S. And of course, I'm going to choke now because it's so exciting. But we today are traveling down under. That's right, we are going to Australia to learn about the civil rights struggles of the Aborigines in Australia, which were greatly influenced and moved forward by the work of the civil rights movement here in the U.S., which I found really fascinating. Today, though, we do have a special guest with us all the way from Australia. We have one of our explorers, Miss Jennifer Perry. Hello, Jennifer.
Good day, good afternoon to you all.
Awesome, and it is 8 o'clock in the morning where you are right now, right? Breakfast time.
Yes, it is. I'm from Sydney, Australia. It's just after 8 a.m.
Excellent.
On Saturday.
Oh, one said that's right. That's right. I keep forgetting. Wow. We also have Agent Caleb with us today. Hey, Caleb.
Hey there, everybody. How's everyone doing?
And we have our host of Afternoon at the Museum, the incomparable Miss Stephanie Watts. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Janine. Thanks for that kind, very long word. And welcome, Jennifer, Caleb, and our behind-the-scenes tech wizardry guy, Ryan.
How could I forget?
Everybody
and the
almost
Aira
forgets
check
me this week. I see how it is.
Right. And is the Aira Check Corp friend with us today, or is it just Ryan?
No, it's just me today.
No, he gave the robot a day off. He was afraid maybe the batteries wouldn't last to get us all the way to Australia today.
Yeah, I know, all the way to Australia. But I'm looking forward to this show, and I so appreciate Jennifer for joining us. We extended a little bit of a late invitation. That was my bad, but I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So we will, at the end of the show, tell you a little bit about, I am wearing my Irish shirt today. This is kind of a new Irish shirt. So at the end of the show, we will describe the shirt and tell you how you can get an Irish shirt of your very own, should you wish to do so. So, Caleb, today we're going to kind of take a little trip to Australia, and you are an Australiaphile, right? You are very interested in Australia when we were talking about doing museums here. So, yeah. So I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie, and let's see where Caleb has chosen to start us out at here.
Sounds good. Well, again, greetings, everyone. And Jennifer, I don't know if you have a particular way to greet people. I don't want to botch it up, but I'll just say my American hello and welcome. And would you like to greet our guests?
Hello, everyone. I can say good day from the land down under. That's probably a good greeting to start with.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so I would say, Caleb, since you have a lot of knowledge and maybe history about Australia.
I wouldn't say a lot.
Well, you know, well, okay, and that's great. And I'm gonna treat this like what I would consider an Aira Explorer experience to be. If I had the pleasure of visiting Australia, I would connect with an Aira agent. And Jennifer and I would be taking this journey together with our Aira agent. And what I would do is say, well, where are we? What do we have as far as choices, things to see and do related to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia? What do you got, Caleb?
So the site I brought up, I'm currently sharing my screen to anyone that can see it. I brought up the National Museum of Australia. They have an indigenous peoples collection, and there's a large wealth of information there. On the first page, though, it kind of is the launch point. The first item there is called Search Indigenous, and it says see indigenous objects in our collection Explorer. So that leads to the full collection, where you can go through and pick individual items. And on that button, there's like an image of an Aboriginal artwork. Looks almost like it's some kind of creature, a lizard, I believe, that has concentric circles all around it. And it's almost like Mesoamerican style, but it's got its own style, but it's very angular and circles, it's like a bunch of angles mixed with swooping, kind of curling lines and stuff as well. The next main button that they have there has an image of an Aboriginal man with a walking stick and a bag on his hat. It says collaborating for Indigenous rights, 1957 to 1973. Then there's another one that looks like it's for an exhibit called Aboriginal breastplates, and it has several, looks like either bronze or gold breastplates that it's like a crescent moon. Some of them are a little more boomerang shaped, and like at the end of each crescent there is a chain that I presume would go around the neck and let that plate hang over the chest. So those are like the big three that like pop up when you first log onto the site. But if you keep scrolling down, they have collection highlights. So it's like some of the more popular items, and I can go through those and read those if you like.
Yes, well, and it sounds like from what you read a few moments ago, the movement, I don't know if it started in 1957, but sounds like the civil rights piece was going strong from 1957 to 1973.
If you like, I can click on that one and explore more.
Yes, and as you're getting ready to click that, Jennifer, please feel free to jump in with any questions or comments you have. I mean, this is pretty informal, so if you think of something you would want us to explore more, or if you want to add anything, please don't hesitate to just jump right in.
I was just going to say that period of time was actually a defining moment where legislation was changed in the 50s, late 50s, mid 60s, where Indigenous and Aboriginal people had some more recognition, and there was a lot of activity around that period.
Okay.
Is there any? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, is there anything you think concerning the exhibits that we should maybe have as a starting point, or should we just let Caleb go for it?
I think where Caleb is going to right now is a good, perfect place to start, because as I was saying, that was a time where there was some redefinition.
Okay.
So they have a little blurb here about the period. It says the 15 years from the late 1950s to the early 1970s was a time of unusual collaboration between Black and white activists in Australia. Alliances were formed between Aboriginal Australians motivated to help their people and white Australians wanting to redress the injustices suffered by dispossessed peoples in the building of the Australian state. This site tells their stories. And then there are several photos that are also links to different categories. The first one here is civil rights. There's land rights, people, organizations. There's a timeline, and there's additional resources.
Civil first.
Okay. The two worlds of post-war Australia. The majority. In the period following the Second World War, the vast majority of Australians lived in a world of houses serviced with water and power, and where laws ensured social order. People on the whole had jobs to do and enough to eat, and if they didn't, government benefits and services helped them through hard times. Mostly they lived in or near cities. They were proud to be subjects of the Queen and believed that they lived in a fair and just democracy. Unhindered by problems such as as class distinctions in Britain or racial tensions in the United States or South Africa. There's a photo here. It's labeled Victory Celebration, Tranby College, Sydney, June 1967. It's a group of Black and white people in a can't really tell what kind of room they're in. They're all holding glasses though. Some are wine, some are beer glasses. And they all appear to be toasting. There's one Black woman that kind of is the eye-catching part of the shot, like, because she's staring straight at the lens and she's got a giant smile on her face. Keeping going, it says the indigenous minority. The other world was inhabited by people whose ancestors had lived in Australia for more than 65,000 years. By the 1950s, having lost land and livelihood, many were paupers living in humpies on the edge of town, rubbish dumps, and earning occasional money as fruit pickers. They were not eligible for the dole or other state benefits which whites received. State laws told indigenous peoples where they were allowed to live, where they could and couldn't move, and who they could marry. They were often not the legal guardians of their own children. Local policemen controlled their earnings, doling out small amounts in pocket money according to the individual judgment or whim. In Queensland, the law even allowed mission managers to open and censor mission dwellers' letters. Bridging the Gulf. There was little contact between the inhabitants of these two worlds. The majority either didn't know or didn't care about the sufferings of the minority. However, events in the late 1950s brought the sufferings of the few into the living rooms of the many. Some were both aware of Aboriginal disadvantage and doing what they could to address it. They recognized the potential to form a grassroots reform movement to bring the rights and protections of Australian citizens to the dispossessed Aboriginal population. And it goes civil rights activism. From the late 1950s, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal activists came together to campaign for equal rights for Indigenous Australians and to bring about the repeals of laws which deprived Indigenous Australians of civil liberties. Quote, Fight for Civil Rights is an account of 7 key civil rights campaigns and the activists and organizations that participated in them. It begins with the Warburton Ranges campaign in the 1950s. And then it's got links for those 7 campaigns. If you like, I can read out the names and the descriptions, or just the names of the campaign.
I'm curious to know if there are any paintings, photographs, artifacts that go along with the readings as you read them, so we can get some visual content.
On this page, there's just that photo. There's photos next to some of the other campaigns. I know that in the collections page, there's a lot of like actual like artifacts and descriptions of artifacts and stuff. I don't know if they had it cordoned off. I didn't see any cordoned off specifically to civil rights, but I could definitely go back and check.
Well, that's okay. We can move forward. That's fine.
All right. So the first fight for civil rights was the Warburton Ranges controversy in 1957. The Commonwealth government was testing nuclear weapons and firing rockets in the Central Desert, compromising Indigenous people's healths. Then in 1958 to 1959, Albert Naptejira and citizenship. Albert Naptejira, famed Arente artist, was not classified as a ward of the state by 1957 legislation, and so became an Australian citizen. This prevented him from associating with relatives who were not citizens. 1954 to 64, social service benefits. The old age pension and unemployment benefits were not available to Aboriginal Australians in the 1950s. The Social Services Act was amended in 1959 to include them, but many impediments remained. And I just realized I wasn't describing the pictures associated with this one. The social services benefits, there's a picture of an Aboriginal mother. She's got a infant child in a sling over her right shoulder, and she's got a toddler on her shoulders. The toddler has like wispy, like kind of like a bob hair and a giant smile on his face. The mom has a smile on her face as well, but it's a mom that has 2 children hanging from her smile. For the Albert Namatjira, it's a close-up profile shot of of a indigenous man. He's got very short cut hair. He's wearing a suit. It appears like it looks like a blazer jacket. There are two white women looking on, and he appears to be looking down at something on the table in front of him.
Okay. Okay.
Then there is the Warburton Ranges controversy. And with that one, kind of hard to make out because it's a little bit of like a grainy photo. I'm gonna just maximize it a little bit. But yeah, it appears to be an indigenous man. He's wearing shorts and a white shirt tucked into them. His back is to the camera, and he appears to be addressing a group of white people. He's got his hands kind of splayed out to his side, like kind of like almost like a pleading kind of, you know, like pleading his case kind of gesture.
Okay.
All right, the next one was from 1969 to 72. That's the Queensland Trust Fund. It's got a picture of, there's 4 white people. They've got signs. One of them says, one of them says, they took our land and they are taking our home. And then there's 2 other ones, but I can't fully make out what they say. It says the Aboriginal Queenslanders who were under the act, quote, under the act, did not have the right to spend or manage their own money. Their earnings were paid into a trust fund and doled out to them by the local policeman as he saw fit. The campaign against the trust fund drew attention to this injustice. And there is the Referendum, 1957 to 67. There is a picture of a man and a woman next to a sign that says Aborigines Conference, Day of Mourning, Aborigines Only. The man and woman appear to be white. There's 4 children in front of them as well. One of them has darker skin, but I think it might just be the exposure of the black and white camera. It says, after 10 years of campaigning, a referendum was held to change the Australian Constitution and recognize Aboriginal people as full Australian citizens. And there's the Freedom Ride of 1965. That one's just got a photo of a bus passing in front of a building. It says, in February 1965, a group of University of Sydney students organized a bus tour of Western and coastal New South Wales towns. Their purpose was to draw public attention to the poor state of Aboriginal health, education, and housing. And then the last one here, Equal Wages, 1963 through 66. There's a picture of 2, appears to be Aboriginal men shaking. I see one white man in the front, and then I see another white hand shaking the second man's hand. It says, for white civil rights activists in the 1960s, equal pay was the basic marker of acceptance and social inclusion in Australian society. However, the achievement of equal wages in the pastoral industry turned out to be a hollow victory for many.
Taylor, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Oh, okay. I was having some audio and some video challenges in my background, so I just wanted to just check
Awesome.
in. All right, thank you.
So any of those can be expanded upon, or I can go back to the collection and we can look at some of the artifacts.
And Jennifer, do you have any?
Referendum? I was just going to say that referendum is really a very defining moment. As Caleb said, it took a huge amount of campaigning, and the other thing that was going on around this period and before is that a thing that was happening was that often Aboriginal children would be separated, taken from their parents, thinking that the thinking was that children would education opportunity and life, they would be, in quotes, better off the what was referenced as the white system, and that went on for a long time. So that's caused a huge amount of, as you can imagine, intergenerational scarring and trauma, which still exists because, of course, those children have now grown up, they're still around. So, and then, as you said, and this referendum one was a very important milestone, which really set the path for some other things that happened later on, which we haven't got to yet, which if it's not on this page, I'll reference, but I think it's worth looking at that referendum if there's any more about it.
There is. I can expand upon that.
Great. And while Caleb is doing that, I'm just taking in the fact that these children were taken away from their parents to be part of the white system, but they still weren't citizens. Isn't that amazing? I mean, just like, wow.
The disconnect.
And, it just, I can see the generational scarring coming from that.
Well, and it's the injustice, whether it's here in the US or in Australia or other parts of the world, the injustice of separating families it's just jaw-droppingly sad that people miss what the impact is on a long-term basis.
And of course, the other part of that impact, immediate family, but it really impacted entire communities, elders and the relationships within villages or in different groups, and because it would just break that up. And it was just extremely disempowering, completely traumatic, and caused just further really division and resentment and a whole lot of other terrible experienced emotions and behaviours that, that would be, it was just completely, as you said, the injustice was just astounding.
Yeah. And Jennifer, I'll ask you one more question before we let you go on, Caleb. Is there, simultaneous to the civil rights movement, is there entertainment, artists, entertainers, actors, the like there, who are also, like some of our actors here in US, giving using their platform for civil rights to speak out? Was that also going on during that time, to your knowledge?
Actually, the people I can think of are later, but there is definitely people that do that, and there's people that spring to mind that were later, but I'm not sure about during that time. I'm sure there was. I just can't think at the moment.
Right.
But one artist that springs to mind, which was quite a bit later, which we'll mention in a minute, was Yossi Yindi. They're musicians and were very successful for a while in the 90s, and a couple of other things happened just before then too. And but there's definitely artists and musicians and so forth that express what's happening or not, and continue that push for change in the civil rights movement. And it rights, I mean, even it's ongoing, because there's always there's the whole discussion about reconciliation and how that occurs and how that's progressing, and that's an ongoing thing.
Yes, I would imagine so. Okay. All righty, Caleb. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to start with an audio clip, if that's okay. It's Petition Gathering for the Referendum is the title.
I can't remember the dates leading up to the referendum, but by about 65, 66, it had gained momentum, and we were given petitions, and these petitions were brought down, brought down to Victoria, and it was our job to get names on them. And Doug and I was employed by the Advanced League then as a field officer, and we used to go up to Smith Street, Collingwood, with a little card table outside of Old Foy & Gibson's. It's not there anymore. And Doug would be yelling out, "Give Aboriginal citizenship rights," and he'd be dragging people. And Doug was like chewing gum to anyone, because if he put his hand on them, they'd come right to the table, he can mesmerise them, Doug, and get them there. And it was Doug's job to lead them to the table. And here's me sitting at the table getting people to sign. But we signed those petitions there. But we also had a good spot outside the Collingwood football ground on home matches, outside the Collingwood member stand. Now, Collingwood footballers, that black in one eye or one-eyed, but normally they just rush into the grandstand to get their seat. But this particular day, Doug Nichols, again, as they were walking in, and everybody knew Doug. I mean, Doug was a household name. He was better known than Henry Bolte, who was the premier at the time. As soon as they see Doug, they couldn't resist Doug. So he'd lead them to the table and we get these petitions. And we got a lot of petitions signed. And so did all the other workers in Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
So that was Alec Jacomos, Federal Council for the Advancement of Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders Oral History Project, 12th December 1996, Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. I guess it's just a citation there.
So there you go. Stephanie, you were asking about athletes and artists and whatnot.
Next, like expanding upon the referendum, there's a photo here on the page, and it's labeled Aunt Celia and Granny Monsell campaigning in Brisbane for a yes vote. And maybe Jennifer could explain a little more who they are, or I could Google it as well. But they are sitting on a big flatbed like semi truck. They've got like a parade float kind of deal going on, and I can see vote yes, I can see equal on there, and then there's also a boomerang, but there's a bunch of people standing on the back, so it's hard to see all of the banners. There's two elderly Aboriginal women, and then there's a bunch of children around them, both white and Aboriginal. Says in 1967, after 10 years of campaigning, a referendum was held to change the Australian Constitution. 2 negative references to Aboriginal Australians were removed, giving the Commonwealth the power to legislate for them as a group. This change was seen by many as a recognition of Aboriginal people as full Australian citizens. The referendum campaign effectively focused public attention on the fact that Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders Australians were second-class citizens with all sorts of limitations, legislative and social, on their lives. This decade-long campaign to change the Constitution came to symbolize the broader struggle for justice being fought during these years. Activists presented the case for a Commonwealth government, which would be prepared to take responsibility for Indigenous citizens wherever they live for the first time. And then
I just want to jump in real quick and ask a question. And Jennifer, you may know the answer, or Caleb, you may Google it. I'm hearing the term Aboriginal Australians, and then I think it's Torres Strait Islanders. Is there a significant difference, or are they all Aboriginal? Is that correct terminology?
So according to Wikipedia here, Torres Strait Islanders are the Indigenous peoples of the Torres Strait Islands, which are the part of the state of Queensland, Australia. Ethnically distinct from the Aboriginal people of the rest of Australia, they are often grouped with them as Indigenous Australians. Today, there are many more Torres Strait Islander people living in mainland Australia than on the islands.
Okay.
There's a little bit of more information about it. I can read if you like.
I think that answers my basic question, because I didn't know if the terms were interchangeable or if there really was a difference. So yeah, I think I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I found that very interesting as they were including, those two populations. And this is one of those stories that really kind of overlaps our own Indigenous First Nations peoples and the struggles of African Americans, actual Blacks. And the first time I heard Aborigines in Australia referred to as Blacks, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute, what? No. But this is one of those just stories that kind of mixes those two groups in our mind as people in, North America and the way we see history. And it kind of turned my head upside down for a while.
The other message about that too, of course, is that just that the tremendous struggle and the struggle that happened previously and the struggle that's still going on in both groups, and it's a unifying factor.
Now, I will ask, as we're kind of looking around at kind of other things in this museum, and we kind of go towards some of the more Aboriginal, maybe art and things like that. So, Jennifer, are there kinds of unrest like there are here in the United States, like where we had riots this past summer? Did things like that happen in Australia? It sounds like a dumb question, but I'm kind of curious.
It's not a dumb question at all. There's occasional protests, and then it's funny you mention that, because the one point which hasn't been resolved, which has always been ever since the beginning. So, and by the beginning, I mean by when First Nations were in the country many, many thousands of years ago. And then, of course, all these other people came along on the 26th of January and started to live in Australia, or in state. It became Australia later on, the foundation in 1901. But the point of that is that date of the 26th of January by the Indigenous community is a day of invasion. And so January 26th has just passed. So that is still a really emotional, difficult day for many people, for people that came from England and Europe and other places, and Captain Cook and all of that. See it as a celebration and a founding day of the country, of sort of being in a new land and so on. But Aboriginals, Torres Strait Islanders, of course, view that as Invasion Day. And there's been a lot of discussion, some peaceful protests about changing the day to something that's less divisive, or not having it at all. And that is something that is an ongoing thing. And understandably, it's a very difficult issue to try and resolve, work through.
Boy, that sounds familiar.
It is. It sounds
Columbus Day here. Yeah.
Yep. I wanted to ask, just conscious of time, I wanted to ask if there's anything on this page about, later on there was a very monumental land rights bill that went through called Mabo. And I was wondering if there's anything about that on this page.
I did not see that mentioned. There's like a timeline here. It might fit.
Probably 1980s, late 80s. It would be, if it's going to be anywhere.
Yeah, I think there was a land rights link or exhibit early on.
What was the name of it? They've got a search feature. I think
Marbo? It was called Mabo, and the reason I mention it is because this was another very significant moment where it really initiated giving back land, recognising land ownership by Aboriginal Indigenous Australians. And the thing was called the National Mabo Agreement, and it was it was a monumental piece of legislation in the late 80s, because until that time there was not a lot of recognition for any of that. And there are places like, or perfect examples of that is, as a consequence, Ayers Rock has now been given back its Indigenous name, called Uluru, and it's Uluru, and it's that's a direct consequence of that sort of legislation where ownership and Indigenous land rights are now recognised.
Be nice. We could have something like that here. That's a whole other 7 shows.
And it's an ongoing thing. It's
sure
it allows for it to occur as appropriate. And it has, and that was in a conciliatory and proper way. It's not open slather, so to speak, but it's in an orderly fashion.
Interesting. I really wanted to visit Ayers Rock when I was in Australia, and I simply didn't have time given the schedule that I was on. But I are you no longer allowed to walk on the rock at all either, I believe?
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things and part of it was really about preservation, because the amount of human tourism damage impact either to the rock or rubbish left behind and things is unfortunately it's a little bit desecrated. So the decision was made. That was really a big part of it, and to preserve it as a sacred piece of land.
Sure, which I think is I would much rather have it that way than,
and that's only happened recently in the last year or so.
Yeah, I thought I remembered seeing that people were no longer, and you can see it from afar, which is wonderful. But no more walking up the rock, and definitely no more climbing on the parts that you would do any mountain climbing on, which is probably it's about time for that to happen. But
well, that's what reconciliation, at least somewhat, looks like. We could take note of that. Acknowledgement.
So what have you found, Caleb?
There's a pretty lengthy article they've written here under their category defining moments, the Mabo.
Well, maybe we can at least hear a bit of it, again, in the interest of time, and maybe if there's any artifacts that can be described that would help again with context and what things were looking like. That sound okay?
Yep, let's do it. And folks, in case you were wondering, we are at the National Museum of Australia.
I imagine this is one museum that would take at least a few days to go through to really drink in all of the history, the rich history of the country. Caleb, did we lose you?
Oh no, and I think hopefully we will get Caleb back here in a minute. I think we did lose him for just a minute, but
well, while we're waiting for Caleb to come back, though, Janine, we have about the promo too.
We do. Hang on, let me. There we go. Up, and here is Caleb back again. But,
sorry about that. Zoom just crashed on me for some reason.
No worries. No worries. So, Caleb, while you are getting back up and going.
Oh, I'm back.
All right, and he is back up. Here we go.
But yeah, so there's a photo of Eddie Coikimabo at Lost Murray Island, 1989. It's an Aboriginal man sitting in front of some kind of like jungle trees, looks like bamboo. There's also what looks to be like I believe it's a fish trap, just from what I know, of kind of the people and how they would fish and that kind of stuff. Basically what it's like a big cone. It's kind of hanging in the trees, which like maybe to dry, but it's like a big cone that is, I can't tell what type of like branches or whatever, whether it's bamboo or whatnot, but these branches are tied together in a way that they create this like kind of funnel shape. And there's also a fishing net over his left shoulder, so that would lead me to believe that probably is a fish trap. But he's got a real big smile on his face, like it's kind of the left cheek's a little cocked higher than the right. He's kind of, it's got a little cheeky grin.
As though he maybe caught lots of fish that day or beat somebody in competition.
Yeah, it's just like today's my day kind of look. And I can read this article if you like, or I can continue. There's a couple other photos here. I can describe those first.
let's dive into the article a little bit, and then we might stop again in understanding that we have so much and we know we won't cover it all, but at least let's get a little bit of the article.
For sure. It says on the 3rd of June, 1992, the High Court of Australia recognized that a group of Torres Strait Islanders led by Eddie Mabo held ownership of Mare, in quotations, Murray Island. In acknowledging the traditional rights of the Meriam people to their land, the court also held that native title existed for all Indigenous people. This landmark decision gave rise to important native title legislation the following year and rendered terra nullius a legal faction. There's a quote here by Eddie. It says, "My father told me, son, this land would belong to you when I die." And then there's a photo underneath of tradition. It's labeled traditional Mare, Murray Island dancers. And it's a group of men, like they're in like a real long line, like processional line. There's probably 30 people at least kind of in a line, and they're all in super ornate kind of headdresses and like outfits and stuff. Very Native American reminiscent, except their headdresses, so looks like, so they're almost like a big horseshoe. So it's like a large horseshoe that like extends up about half a foot above them, and it's like the fans, so it's kind of like a horseshoe shaped fan. It's got like fringes on the end, and at the top it's kind of split, so almost it could also kind of look like wings, in a way. And then there's actually like a helmet that kind of goes down to their to like their brow, and it appears to be metal, or it could maybe be a carved wood. It's hard to tell with the black and white, but it is itself pretty ornate. Like it's got like a center pillar down, and there's holes kind of cut into the helmet, like kind of, if you imagine like a tall kind of Roman helmet, but with like stylized holes. The holes kind of look like almost like a paisley pattern, or like commas on them. and then like from that helmet, like right across like the center of it, like going from ear to ear is where that horseshoe goes, and it fans out, and it goes down past their chin.
Wow.
So it's a pretty, like the whole like headdress is probably 1.5 feet tall. It looks
That's
like
headdress.
It appears that most of them, if not all of them, are carrying spears. The guys in the front of the line, they are like crouching down. They're in like a crouch pose. Like their back is almost parallel with the ground. And they've got their spears to their side, their faces straight forward, and they're kind of like a prowling. There's actually 2 of the guys that they look like they've kind of diverted away from the line a little bit, and they're like kind of hamming it up straight to the camera. Like they're both looking right at the camera. One of the guys has his tongue out, and it's like real big and wide. The other guy's just kind of staring. As the line goes back, though, it looks more like they're kind of just waiting. They're just kind of standing around the kind of more casual poses. So it looks like it's like a progressional, and as they get to that spot, like they kind of hunker down and get into go mode. Their dress, they are shirtless, except for they have kind of looks like palm fronds or some kind of leaves wrapped around their biceps, and then they have, it's a little hard to tell with the picture, but they have some kind of like pants, but with like a leaf skirt or some kind of fringe over top of them. And so like around their knees, around their elbows, there's the kind of like a fringy. Looks like it's fronds of like some kind, but it also could be feathers. I'm not fully positive.
And the tongue out gesture, I know from the Maori in New Zealand, looking at one of their museums a while back, that tongue out gesture is threatening. That's not like sticking my tongue out. That is a threatening gesture. And
I mean,
yeah,
his face, like his nose is real kind of like scowled up. His eyes are very like yeah, he definitely doesn't look like he's being silly.
Yeah, I found that interesting. I actually went to the Polynesian Cultural Museum, and they had some of the artifacts, and the spears are really ornately carved. And some of them had the figures with the tongues sticking out, and oh, that's really funny. Oh, no, it's not. I was taught very quickly that is not a funny gesture. So really interesting how things like that move. Well, we have Jennifer for just a few more minutes. Stephanie, is there anything that you would like to ask her? For example, blind folks in Australia, let's say, what about the Aboriginal blind folks? Are they pretty much integrated into society, or how is that working? Because I know, like here in the US, even up through the 60s, there were separate schools for the blind for blacks and whites. Is that the case in Australia for blind people?
Happy to say no. The integration is very strong, whether it be so there might be schools for people who are blind and vision impaired, but people are there's no separation as such. Where there is some work to do is around connecting into communities, and that's ongoing, just to do with culture, because of course there's education in communities as well as education in the main school system, and both occur sometimes in parallel and other times separate. But there is some there are people in schools in mainstream education, and then there's still some things, cultural and other things, that still occur separately. So there's a little bit in parallel as well as and there's all the challenge is all still and will be that being able to reach out to people who are blind and vision impaired through and actually reach deep into communities and to engage in the culture. And there are groups that do that. For instance, First Networks people in Australia. Company I work for has Aboriginal forums, so we engage people to come together as well.
Oh, great.
So there's a whole lot of things that are going on in the background, and that's really pushing to integrate and to be able to understand. I think a lot of barriers are around understanding or not of different cultures and the experience and why things are and how they've come to be. And I think that's an ongoing process. I'm hoping that's improving, and there's a lot more awareness both in the public now. For instance, in sports and anything like that, there's a lot more respect and acknowledgement of those cultures. So there'll be acknowledgement of country in every meeting, anything formal, sporting events, all sorts of things. There's acknowledgement of country and the land that's referenced at the Aboriginals, which Aboriginal land it is an event might be being held on, for example. So there's a lot of work being done, and there's a lot still to do just to bring people closer together.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah, that's I mean, and Janine, your question was similar to what I was going to ask, and again, I just want to thank you, Jennifer, for spending time with us and really putting some local perspective on all of this, because again, we're two different countries with two different struggles, but the common through line is civil rights of Indigenous people, and not just Indigenous people, but let's just be candid, people of color. And you know, that's, you know, it's the commonality. And I think the shared vision is we all want to be respected for who we are and what our culture brings, whether we have immigrated to a land or are Indigenous people or were enslaved, brought to a land, enslaved, etc. So I really appreciate you being available for us today.
You're welcome. And I want to say I really hope the day will come, whether it's in my lifetime or in the future, where there's just much more acceptance and unity. And I think we're working towards that. And I really hope that continues. Being human after all. And I think there's so much that, as you said, different cultures and perspectives can bring so much enrichment to how people live. And we need to embrace that. And I hope that continues.
Agreed. Now, who do you work for? What is the organization that you work for? Because we'd love to give them a shout out.
The organisation I work for is called Blind Citizens Australia. Our mission statement is to inform, connect and empower, and that's all people who are blind or vision impaired, regardless of culture, ethnicity or background. And so part of our work is reaching, connecting and gaining closer connections with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and engaging that way through forums and other things. So if you're interested in reading more about it, the website is bca.org.au, bca.org.au.
Great. And we'll have Ryan put that up in the chat and in on the YouTube chat page, comments page. And also BCA are wonderful partners with Aira. They have been partners with us since the beginning, since we came into Australia, and we're really proud to be working with them, especially on some of the issues of getting Aira for folks through the NDIS, and we're really happy about that. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us. This has been awesome, and we hate to lose you, but if we understand you're probably going to need to go here in a few minutes. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me here, and it was great to be part of the session.
Yes.
Speak with you all soon, another time.
Yes, most definitely.
Oh, definitely.
I love the museum here.
Definitely. So we
and
could
Janine,
probably...
I do have thoughts about other museums, so I will email you.
I was going to ask.
Absolutely.
Send them on.
Absolutely. Please email me some others that you would like us to cover, and we will definitely do that, because we are looking in this last few minutes. We'll go into kind of our announcement mode here, because we could probably be at this museum all day with Caleb and looking at these artifacts. I do have one thing, though, one link that I found. There we go, at an organization called Australia Together. And there is a really short video that, I don't, Caleb, if you have that link up from the email. Yeah, oh, awesome. So let's take a look at this, because this really brought it home to me that what we do here in this country, we sometimes think, oh, you know, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're just doing it here. But where do you see what an impact this had around the world? So.
All right. It's titled Charlie Perkins Segregation.
Although Australian citizenship was finally extended to include Indigenous Australians in 1948, Indigenous issues weren't high on the national agenda during the decades spanning the Depression and the Second World War. But then, in the 1960s, around the time of the civil rights movement in the US, Australia too had advocates much like Martin Luther King Jr. rise up from within the Indigenous community. These courageous men and women began campaigning for a change in the way Indigenous Australians were treated by the government and society. Inspired by the African American freedom riders in the American South, Charlie Perkins organised a similar bus tour in 1965, protesting illegal segregation in public facilities like swimming pools and theatres. This brought the plight of Indigenous Australians into lounge rooms all over the country.
And so I became involved. We started planning for them. We said, let's go out to these country towns and expose, you know, the deplorable living conditions of Aboriginal people, not only to white people and the nation as a whole, but to blacks. So that was the decision. Let's get out there and do something. What we're going to do, we didn't really know, but we were going to do something. And it was going to be pretty dramatic. And what we expected to find in Moree, as we all knew very well, was a lot of racism in terms of the town hall, in terms of the swimming pool, in terms of the picture theatres. It was a way of life. Aborigines sat down the front of picture theatres, nowhere else. And you walked in when the lights went off. Women don't go into dress shops and touch any of the clothes. Once they touch them, they buy them.
We're showing footage alternating of.
You don't get served first in the shop if there's some white people in front of you. You get served last.
Oh, wow.
You don't go into pubs. You only get served at night down the back streets. And so with some trepidation, we're heading towards Moree, knowing all of these things were happening, knowing there's a lot of racism and what we're going to do about it. And we saw some of the parents, we said, can we take the kids with us to the bars? And the parents said, that's fine. You know, the mothers particularly, take them for a swim. And they said, but you won't get in the bars. They're not allowed to go in. I said, oh, we'll at least try. We'll give it a try. And they were more revolutionary than anybody, so I just couldn't believe it.
Bunch of children running
And I
onto
said
a
to the
bus.
manager of the bars, I said, you know, we'd like to go in, we'd like to buy so many tickets. And he said, well, you're not allowed in. And I said, why not? He said, because Aboriginal people are not allowed in the bars.
If they haven't got the health regulations, how would you get on? They can bar me from going into our stores or anything on.
Yes, but that's not the
The
reason
same,
they're
I'd be
barring
not
them. You
back.
go and
I'm
read
not
the
allowed to
council. Go and read the council motion. The council, the law of the council says that no Aboriginal.
And I said to the mayor, we're not going anywhere. Nobody's having a swim in Moree bars. If the blacks can't swim, the whites won't swim. He said, right, you've left me no alternative now but to call in the police.
And doesn't that sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah, that one shocked me, actually, because I didn't know that kind of thing happened, and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And so,
Well,
yeah.
racism is the through line. And in
Yep.
this country and other countries, I'm sure is not alone, and Indigenous people all across the globe
Mhm.
have been unceremoniously pushed aside to further the interests of others who are in the quote dominant culture.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way. I like what Australia is attempting to do to reconcile with the Aboriginal Indigenous people. And I hope that happens everywhere at some level. And I know it can't be concurrent, but that it happens, or at least gets started, is a way back to healing and unity, because you got to have.
Hopefully.
South Africa did it with apartheid. You know, you
Yeah.
got to have truth and then reconciliation, but can't do acknowledgement of some truth. So
Yeah.
there's a country that has a long way to go with that.
Yeah. And the wounds are pretty fresh, as Jennifer said. And so, it'll be interesting to see how things move along. Well, speaking of moving along, so we are changing up our schedule a little bit here, but next week isn't changing, because next week is the Blind History Lady, and we are going to learn about blind people of color. And that's going to be pretty cool. And we're going to learn all about the Blind History Lady and her website and the just huge realm of history that she has encompassed in her site and in her brain, because Peggy knows everything, believe me. So, and then we will announce what we're going to do on the 26th. We kind of changed our panel up a little bit. We're probably going to look at least one other museum. And we have some choices, so we'll let you know next week exactly what we're going to do on the 26th. But that panel hasn't been forgotten. We're going to have that discussion. We may have it as part of the podcast, though. So, now, about my shirt. I know I promised you all, you've all been waiting to find out about the shirt. So, Caleb, you want to describe the shirt?
Yeah. It is a black long sleeve sweatshirt. In the center, right across the chest, is the blue Aira A logo, and next to it says Aira in the Aira font, and then underneath it, in the same font, it says Janine Stanley.
Woohoo!
Oh, you can customize.
Yes, you can. And, those of you who are familiar with a site called Zazzle, Zazzle, we have a Zazzle store. And Ryan has the Zazzle link that he is going to put up for everybody. So you can go there, get some Aira merch. And you can even get on, as I did with Caleb, and we made this shirt. You can actually go in there and customize the shirts. I also have an Aira hoodie that I have the iconic black Aira hoodie.
Wow.
That's a joke in the company, is that everybody loves that hoodie because it's such a cool hoodie. But we have all kinds of stuff up there. There are several different types of t-shirts. This happens to be a long-sleeved one. There are sweatshirts. There are a couple different kinds of hoodies. And I would say if you are totally blind, you might want to get an agent to help you with some of the descriptions and sizing and things, and the customization. But you can absolutely do it and get yourself some fun Aira stuff. We are going to be working here to possibly get some Aira masks up there even. Caleb and I tried to do it, but I didn't have our login. So, we may get that up there. Well, I want to thank you so much, Stephanie, for being once again our amazing host of Afternoon at the Museum.
You are welcome, and I'm glad to be a part of this. Glad for Caleb to be back with us, and Ryan. I favor Ryan over the Aira Tech robot.
He is a lot better looking than the robot.
The robot,
yes.
right? and you, Janine, thank you so much. You're an awesome producer, and I would say I enjoy working with this team. You guys make this very easy for me.
And we're going to miss you because Stephanie is going to be doing stuff virtually and with the gang in Washington, D.C. On the 26th. But never fear, because we will have a guest host come in and we will take a look at some museums and whatnot, see what trouble we can get into. Next week, it's the Blind History Lady. And I am Janine Stanley here with Ryan Bishop, live at Afternoon at the Museum with Aira.
Bye, everyone.